Well, my beef is that you have not yet written a book in which I was educated about the 27 laws of the sea, which Rear Admiral Mike Studeman did in his new book, Might of the Chain. I'm talking to him next hour about that. But I think you ought to just sit down and write an essay for every one of these law of the sea things because they're fabulous, Admiral.
They really are, and it's hard to pick among them. You memorize them at the Naval Academy when you're a midshipman, and they stay with you forever. In my lifetime, I've reached back to them again and again. By the way, Rear Admiral retired Mike Studeman is someone I know well, have enormous regard for. I had the opportunity to read the book and draft and loved it. And you ought to ask him about his father, Vice Admiral Bill Studeman, three-star intelligence officer, very much a mentor to me in the world of intelligence as I was coming along. It's a pretty cool Studeman family.
Oh, I will definitely do that. That's next hour. I do want to read you the 2 laws of the sea that I thought could actually be a law of everywhere. So ye, being heads of departments, do your growl with a smile on your lips, lest ye strive and in anger be parted and lessen the might of your ship. Followed by, dost think in a moment of anger, 'tis well with thy servant to fight? They prosper who burn in the morning the letters they wrote overnight. These are from 1896, Admiral. This is 1896, yeah. This guy. They should put email in there.
Can I give you one more? There's
yes.
One that is in there, I'm sure, which is, take heed what you say of your seniors, be your words spoken softly or plain, lest a bird of the air tell the matter, and so ye shall hear it again. Meaning, be careful what you say when you think you're off the record, because everything is on the record. That also.
That's why I tell everyone, Admiral, there's no upside in down talk. There is no upside in trashing anyone ever. You don't have to compliment someone who's not doing a good job, but there's very little upside and downside. Let's get to the important stuff.
NATO gathers. One other quote, not from the Laws of the Sea, but from the greatest book of leadership ever written, which of course is The Godfather by Mario Puzo. And in it, and you'll remember this at least from the movie, the Don is counseling his headstrong son, Santino, Sonny the Bull, and he says to him, don't ever make the mistake of hating your enemies. It clouds your judgment. Boy, is that a good line for leaders.
I agree. Well, I'm looking for that book from you, Admiral. Let's go to the NATO summit. First of all, there's a Wall Street Journal article this morning titled, NATO Summit Puts Biden's Fitness Under a Microscope. I do not put political questions to retired flag officers like the Admiral, but I can put a NATO question to you. James Townsend, a senior advisor at the Scowcroft Center, is quoted as saying there are going to be a couple of elephants in the NATO room, and that is one of them, the president's debate performance. Later in the article, it mentions that Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski issued a warning for President Biden on the social media platform X after the debate. Quote, Marcus Aurelius was a great emperor, but he screwed up his succession by passing the baton on to his feckless son Commodus, he from the Gladiator, whose disastrous rule started Rome's decline. It's important to manage one's ride into the sunset. And then finally, Jan Stoltenberg dodged repeated questions about the president's health and fitness during a July 5th press conference, saying, I have had and continue to have a very good working relationship with President Biden. I welcome his very strong personal commitment to the alliance and leadership on Ukraine. I personally don't expect anyone at NATO to say anything about the president's physical condition. Do you, Admiral?
No, I don't. And I will add, I don't know what Jim Townsend's second thing was in the article, but I'll take a guess at it. I would call this summit a tale of two presidents, meaning the first point, Jim Townsend's, that everyone is going to be watching every single microscopic movement of President Biden. That's the first president. Tale of two presidents. The other one is former President Donald Trump. The conversations in the hallways, at the cocktail parties, in the bilats, when they do the pull-asides, those conversations of which I've been a part many, many times in 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander. I went to several of these summits. Those conversations will be about the second former president, and let's be honest, a potential next president of the United States, who's been very critical of NATO, understandably, because of NATO's failure to achieve its self-set goal of 2% of defense spending. The second set of conversations is going to be, what do you think we need to raise our goal to in order to ensure that President Trump, if there is a second Trump administration, will stay in NATO, will support NATO, will lead NATO? I think that number is 2.5%. And certainly the polls, to conclude here, and my good friend Sikorsky is saying the polls are now spending 4%, which is more than the United States. They will certainly be polling for a higher number, and they should be. I think that's the second set of conversations.
Now, Admiral, can you expand for the audience on what the Supreme Allied Commander does and how that's different from the Secretary General? Let's assume that their Steelers fans are tuned in this morning and they don't understand the difference between the Secretary General of NATO and the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. What roles do those two individuals have at this gathering or others like it?
Yeah, this is not completely dissimilar from how the Pentagon runs, which means that there is civilian oversight of uniformed military, as in democracies, we always want that. And so the Secretary General is the overall executive in charge of the NATO alliance, much like the Secretary of Defense is overall in charge of the Department of Defense. The difference is that the Secretary of Defense of the United States, of course, reports to the President. He has a unitary chain of command. The Secretary General of NATO, however, reports to 32 different heads of state and government. So he or she is reporting up to this unwieldy collection of 32 different leaders. And so getting down to the next person down, that's the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. You're the operations officer, if you will, the COO of the NATO alliance. Your job is to conduct prompt and sustained combat operations wherever directed by the Secretary General, who is answering to all of those heads in state of government. There are many other committees and nuances there to learn about, but I think those two actors, Secretary General, like Secretary of Defense, and the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, roughly like the rest of the command structure, the combatant commanders, the Joint Chiefs, all those kind of rolled into one in Supreme Allied Commander. It is a great job and a great title.
So last question, Admiral. On Monday, yesterday, I reported that the Danes had sent a bunch of F-16s to Ukraine, like snapped their fingers and they went with the new government. When you get the NATO heads together, does anyone say, hey, what are you doing that? You're making us look bad. I mean, what is the level of candor in these meetings?
It's a two-speed kind of operation, which is to say there's a big formal plenary where all 32 of them will sit around the table. Briefings will be conducted. As a Supreme Allied Commander, I came in and briefed that group many, many times. So I was briefing U.S. President Barack Obama, Prime Minister of UK David Cameron, French President Nicolas Sarkozy, Chancellor of Germany Angela Merkel. I would go in and brief them. In this case, the hot topic was Afghanistan. After that briefing, there will then be some pretty formal statements, highly briefed up. Occasionally, one or two of the heads of state and government will emote in a human type way. There's not a lot of that. However, off stage, off camera, all staff out of the room, there are moments of real candor around that table. And then the second speed of the conversation is at the reception, at the cocktail party, at the dinner, pull-asides, bilateral meetings where the president of Poland will meet with the president of France. There'll be those kind of second order but vitally important opportunities for real conversation. So bottom line, for example, I attended one of these in Chicago, Illinois, and there was a fair amount of back and forth in the room about Afghanistan, but the real work of that conference, which was getting more European troops to Afghanistan, that occurred in the second set of meetings that I described, away from the press, away from the camera, away from the grandstanding.
Away from the press. Key important thing. Admiral James Stavridis retired. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. If you head over to his Amazon page, pick any of them. But I'm looking forward to his forthcoming bestseller on the laws of the sea. Thank you, Admiral.